Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the iPhone 15. Let's get started. This is the most basic device of the entire iPhone 15 series. As you know, I already had the iPhone 15 Pro Max, iPhone 15 Pro, and iPhone 15 Plus in the channel. So the only thing we were missing was this model, which is the most basic, though not necessarily affordable. For a budget iPhone, the iPhone SE is reserved. Its launch price in Mexico is 19,499 Mexican pesos. On screen you see the reference price in dollars, which is approximately 1,140. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. However, there is no doubt that it is an expensive device, and that is why we are going to demand as much as we can from it, especially comparing it against some of its competitors, although honestly in this price range there are no longer so many devices that compete with each other. One of the advantages of Apple in Mexico and in many other regions is likely to be the distribution, since you can buy it both in their own stores, online or physical, as well as in other stores, partners, and telephone companies. So it's really not complicated because you can find it easily in many stores. Having said this introduction, now let's go through this device point by point. Let's start by taking a look at the front, where we will find a very high utilization of the screen, as it has ultra-reduced bezels, and in this generation already integrates the dynamic island, which will be one of the most important additions because honestly there are few changes compared to the last generation. However, the fact of having the dynamic island gives it a much more current and modern look for the current generation. The front is protected with ceramic shield, so it is a glass that offers a very good level of protection. On the right side, we have the action button with which we can talk to Siri. Interestingly, on the top side, we have absolutely nothing. On the other hand, on the left side, we are going to find the switch, which in this device remains, unlike the Pro models where we find the action button, and we also have the volume buttons. On this same side, we will find the tray where we can place a nano SIM card. At the bottom, we will find the new USB-C port. This will be another novelty with respect to past generations, since now you will be able to use other cables from other devices and not exclusively an iPhone cable. In addition, we have the main speaker and microphones disguised as a speaker, all in an aluminum frame, unlike the Pro models where titanium is already incorporated. However, it is a very good quality aluminum. This is one of the lightest and thinnest devices today, having a weight of 171 grams and a thickness of 7.8 millimeters, so it really is very comfortable to hold in the hand despite the fact that it has no curves on the back cover or on the bezels. Although I must say that the frames are slightly curved and not as sharp as in other generations. Something I didn't like is that although the back cover is made of glass, in this case it doesn't really come with ceramic shield protection as we do see on the front. So we don't have as much resistance, although it's also highly likely that you're going to put a case on it, so it ends up being a bit irrelevant, this data. However, this is a glass that comes with the color injected, so it's a process that Apple calls as very complex, to have a good variety of colors available including black, blue, green, yellow, and pink. So it is one of the devices that have more variety of colors, and that could be one of the strongest points. Although I repeat, if you are going to put a case on it, possibly the design issue is no longer relevant. But something that is going to be very important is the water resistance, so it integrates IP68 certification, which guarantees in this case that the device can withstand for 30 minutes to 6 meters deep in pure water. So the truth is that it has very good resistance. Probably within its range and its competitors, it is the one that has the best resistance. Although, as always, I must tell you that no manufacturer will validate the warranty if it is damaged by water. And remember that the test is done in pure water. So, although nothing will happen immediately if you immerse it in swimming pools or seawater, it is recommended that you do these practices for a short time and then rinse it with pure water to prevent it from deteriorating so quickly. Although in a natural way, the protection against water degrades with the passage of time. The screen will be of excellent quality in many respects except for one. First, let me tell you some of its specifications, for its size is 6.1 inches. In other words, it's a considerably compact screen compared to what many of the smartphones offer us today. So this is a small device. Its resolution is 1179 by 2556 pixels, so it's a very Apple-specific resolution, but that in total gives us a pixel density of 460 pixels per inch. So we have a lot of sharpness, whether it's for watching some very detailed videos or movies or even small text when reading. So the experience really is very detailed. And it offers us an OLED panel, so it has very vivid colors, very high contrasts, and also very good viewing angles so that the content is still appreciated well from different directions. In fact, it will also be a screen with very high brightness. It can peak at 1600 nits when displaying HDR content, and even when you're outdoors it can peak at 2000 nits, so you have a very good display, guaranteed even in bright sunlight. Also, the display supports XDR content, so there are some areas that are able to emit a higher amount of illumination, as you can notice, to give you a much greater realism when viewing these types of pictures. Really, the experience is just too good. It could be a perfect display, but Apple has decided to put 60 Hz on its refresh rate, so the movements don't look smooth at all. Honestly, I'm used to testing too many devices, and this is the one that feels much slower. Even low-end Android devices have a smoother scrolling through lists or swiping between different apps. Actually, although the animations are very well optimized in iOS, the difference is totally visible between one of these 60 Hz screens and a 90 or more Hz screen, like the ones we can find in other Android devices. So the refresh rate is an unforgivable issue for a device of this price. At the very least, we would ask for 90 Hz, but Apple is still stuck in offering us 60 Hz. Apple doesn't offer different color calibrations for the display for something that suits your taste better, but it does have the True Tone feature in order to match the hue of the environment a bit more. In this case, I disabled True Tone and it looks a little cooler screen. But if I enable True Tone, the screen is going to match its white to match it in a very similar way to what it is in the environment. So really, this is a very good experience. In addition to night shift for visual rest or dark mode, which are features that other devices usually have as well. This device integrates stereo sound. So we have one speaker on the bottom, and the second speaker is in the earpiece area for calls. A bit curious placement. The volume is loud and crisp, but the bottom speaker is the one with a good bass frequency presence, while the upper speaker complements the surround sound but does not offer us a symmetrical sound, although of very good quality. What do you think if we listen to a small test? Although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. The bad news is that Apple does not offer too many configuration and customization options in the sound section. In fact, you will only find an equalizer within the Apple Music app. But if you do not use Apple Music, you will not have access to this equalizer where you could somehow get to customize a little more your experience through different presets. So there are other manufacturers that offer us a much more complete experience in this section. Also, as you realize, it doesn't have a headphone jack, so if you want to use headphones, you'll have to connect them through the USB-C port. And if you want to use wireless headphones, you can enjoy high resolution only with AirPods or Beats, as they are headphones that integrate Apple's proprietary codec, ALAC. The cell phone also supports the basic SBC codec and a slightly higher resolution one called AAC, but it doesn't really support high resolution codec as we see in the Android world. So, to enjoy excellent wireless audio quality, you need to get Apple's headphones. Next, you will hear a test of the microphones of this device.
Esta es una prueba de sonido grabada con los micrófonos del iPhone 15 para que logremos notar la calidad de captación del sonido.
The microphones are of excellent quality. One is located at the bottom, one is located in the earpiece area for calls, interestingly enough, and one is located on the side of the camera module. The placement of each of these microphones is quite original and unusual to find in the Android world. But overall, we could say that it is a very good microphone system. The front camera of this device is 12 megapixels with f1.9 aperture and autofocus. In addition, Apple emphasizes that in this front camera, it also uses the technologies it has developed mainly for rear cameras, such as photonic engine and deep fusion to give excellent quality to these photographs. I think something that Apple should implement is a quick access to the camera as we find in other devices, since in this case necessarily we need to press the button on the lock screen, but if we are inside any other application or any other area of the system, we have to exit to the main screen and then look for our camera application. So it doesn't have a quick launch option, and I think that could be improved. Sure, you could also ask Siri to open the camera, but if you don't want to talk, that could be awkward. The capture speed is really very good, including the animation. In addition, it offers 2 levels of amplitude for this camera. It's funny because even if you take a traditional picture, the device will automatically capture the portrait information. So after you have taken the picture, you can easily turn it into a portrait picture with a bokeh effect. So it seems to me to be a considerably good option. You'll notice that also if we press the top button, options appear below. This I consider to be not intuitive at all, but here we can also force it to somehow use night mode, although this doesn't always appear available. We can also select some different color calibrations if we want a more suitable color rendition to our liking. Finally, we can also change the ratio of the photograph and adjust the exposure. But another aspect that I would like Apple to improve would be to implement easy capture through the palm of the hand, as sometimes it is difficult to reach the shutter and there is no easy way to take your picture. An alternative would be to press the volume button, but it could also become a bit awkward in certain positions. The selfies will have a very good quality, and what I like most is the accuracy of the colors it handles in addition to the good level of detail it has. So there is no doubt that each of the parameters is very positive in the result we have of the selfies with this device. Also remember that it has autofocus, so it doesn't matter if you're very close to the camera or very far away from it. In either scenario, you're going to get good detail. In fact, it has a considerably good range. If you stretch your arm as far as you can, I think you can get a picture with a good group of friends. In backlit scenes, we have an excellent result. Plus, before we take the picture, it already gives us a good preview. So this device is definitely not afraid of this type of photographs in difficult lighting conditions, as it balances very well the most illuminated areas of this photograph with the areas that are in shadows. Selfies are possibly one of its strongest points. Although indoors, when we no longer have so much light, I must say that the device can suffer a little more, especially because there is much more grain present in the darker areas. Even the colors get a little bit paler, although I must say that very realistic to how the lighting conditions were at the time. But it doesn't make for such an attractive photograph. At night, if we have a nearby light source, the result will be positive, although very similar to what we saw in the interior photography, with a level of detail not so high. And in the most extreme conditions, such as against nightlight, the device has a good result in general, although if you get closer to notice a little more detail, we will be able to realize that it has much more noise and grain than we would like, although obviously this only in the darkest areas. But definitely that the overall result is good because there are other devices that bring out the completely dark face. So in this case we have a good balance of lights, but the noise issue is a very important detail to mention. In fact, in portrait pictures with the front camera at night, we are also going to notice more noise presence, even in the most illuminated areas. So this should definitely improve, being such an expensive device. But portrait photography in the daytime will have a bit more quality, although interestingly it also has a slightly less detailed texture than what we find with photos without portrait mode. Also, take into account that it is not able to keep objects in focus, so portraits are not as natural as they should be. On the back we find 2 cameras. The main one is 26mm. Curious thing because most smartphones have cameras of 24mm, so this is a little bit closer compared to the rest. In this camera, it gives us 48 megapixels on its sensor, and the lens has an f1.6 aperture, so it has excellent light entry plus autofocus and optical stabilization inside the sensor, so it's very good quality. It also gives us a 13mm camera, which is considered to be the ultra-wide camera, 12 megapixels with f2.4 aperture. Honestly, this camera has a little bit simpler specifications, especially in low light conditions. It probably suffers a bit more. And Apple points out in its specifications a third camera, which we could call a virtual telephoto camera, because it would give us an approximate focal length of 52 millimeters. That is a 2x zoom, which, despite being digital zoom, would maintain optical quality by applying a crop on the sensor. So the photograph would be 12 megapixels and would retain the aperture of the main lens, f1.6, with autofocus and optical stabilization inside the sensor. And something I would also like to highlight is that these cameras come protected with sapphire glass to prevent them from getting scratched easily. That is a good advantage so that the light always enters the sensor as cleanly as possible. For the next test, I will try to capture number 1 to see how fast the capture can be. Let's go with a second attempt now, and finally a third attempt right now. For the last attempt, I got a little bit ahead of myself, but notice how the previous attempts show us that it really has a good capture speed. So in that sense, there is no problem. If you want, you can also do a burst by sliding the shutter to the left, and it's a burst of endless pictures. Notice how with this it would be very easy to capture the exact moment. It really gives us a very nice burst. The controls will be exactly the same as what we saw with the front camera, including the different color renditions that we have available. But a very weak point of the iPhone is that it doesn't have a professional mode in the native camera, with which we can have more parameters. So we have to be satisfied only with adjusting the focus by touching on screen and exposure with this slider. It also does not allow us to capture photos in RAW as the Pro models do, at least not natively. You can probably buy apps to do these functions, but in the same price range, most Android competitors will give us all those capabilities. This device does allow us to take 48 megapixel photographs for later cropping and maintains the level of detail very well. It is definitely one of the devices that best retains all the information from this sensor, so the high-resolution mode can become very useful. Just remember that it does not allow RAW photography unlike the Pro models, where we have even more editing capabilities. In fact, automatically the pictures will come out 24 megapixels, and that gives you a competitive advantage over virtually all competing devices that in auto mode give you 12 megapixel pictures. So here we have much more level of detail, and the lens quality I think is positive. In this case, in outdoor pictures we have a good result. It's not totally free of some distortions in some areas, but definitely that the quality is noticeably high. The ultra-wide camera takes 12 megapixel pictures and you immediately notice that it is of a lower level. Notice how even some areas with much more noise appear, even in these pictures that are outdoors. So the quality of this ultra-wide lens is not as high and does not give us pictures of as high a level as what we were seeing on the main camera. Apple considers a so-called telephoto camera by cropping the sensor. Honestly, it has an okay level of detail, but I don't think it has optical quality. I feel like there are some areas where you can immediately tell it's digital zoom. Indoors, the main camera has an excellent performance keeping the colors well and also having very good noise management because even in the darkest areas, it is not perceived in so much quantity. However, the ultra-wide camera does have much more noise present and little detail, although it maintains color well. Interestingly, in this case, the virtual telephoto seems to me to give a much better result than outdoors. At night, the main camera will also have an excellent performance as it enables a night mode automatically, very little noise present, good color saturation, and very good level of detail. You will only notice that the lens generates some reflections that could be a bit uncomfortable, but the quality is good. Again, we see that the ultra-wide camera suffers a lot in this type of night conditions, and this photograph is in the darkest area, and definitely the result is good, although the color in this scenario was not so accurate, but I must say that it was an extremely complicated photograph because of the darkness generated. In fact, it is curious that on this occasion, the ultra-wide camera did behave in very good quality, eliminating noise in a good way for the most part, although in this case with a long exposure night mode, but the result is totally positive. As additional details of the camera, note that it manages to keep moving objects in focus to take good action shots. In addition, the preview in photographs that are backlit is also correct and the results are very nice. The main camera manages to balance lights and shadows well. The ultra-wide camera also manages to make a good balance, although with less definition, and the virtual telephoto also has a good performance. The maximum zoom of this device is 10x digital, and honestly it is good in some things, but in others it feels that it could be improved with a little more artificial intelligence. For example, it fails to define this sign well, unlike other devices. And definitely within its price range, it's the worst zoom you're going to find because it has no optical zoom. For example, in Galaxy S23 you are going to find a much more defined zoom, so this can easily be one of its weakest points. Macro photography can be positive if you apply digital zoom, as this device doesn't manage to get very close to objects. If you are too close, it will come out totally out of focus, so the ideal would be to be a little further away and apply digital zoom. So the photographic system is not that versatile compared to other devices that might offer an ultra-wide camera with autofocus to allow you to focus from a closer distance. This device offers basic functions. Although with the ultra-wide camera you can gain greater amplitude, remember that it does not offer very good definition. So if you want a wide photo while maintaining good detail, you can use the panoramic mode, which is high resolution, although you'd better use the main camera. In this case, I use the ultra-wide camera to have an even wider picture, and definitely in terms of width the result is very positive, but since the ultra-wide camera has little level of detail, it will not look so spectacular compared to the result we could have taking panoramic pictures with the main camera. Finally, portraits will be of very good quality. Note how in this case it does keep the objects in focus, blurring the background in a very nice way to generate a good bokeh effect. In addition, it maintains the same color accuracy that we see in auto mode and has a very good level of detail. It also allows us to take portrait pictures using the virtual 2x lens, but notice that in this case it is immediately noticeable that it is digital zoom and does not maintain the same optical quality. So portraits with this telephoto distance will definitely come out much better on competitors that have a specific zoom lens. Video recording is always the highlight in iPhones, and this time is no exception, as it allows us to record in 4K at 60 frames per second with any of the cameras. That is both the main camera and the ultra-wide camera, as well as the virtual telephoto 2x and even the front camera. So all cameras are compatible with this very high resolution, and that is something totally positive. When we start our video recording, notice how we have a very convenient slider for zooming. It is probably the best slider in the entire smartphone industry because it reacts very smoothly and is very comfortable. However, the camera app could still improve a lot because although it does allow us to take pictures, which by the way are in 8 megapixels while we are recording, it does not allow us to pause and resume our recording, nor does it allow us to turn on the flashlight unless we stop the video recording. In fact, we can't rotate to the front camera either if we haven't stopped our video recording. So in many ways it feels like a very limited and simple experience compared to the experience offered by other devices. In fact, it also doesn't offer us a pro mode, and something that personally makes me despair a lot is having to go sliding one by one the modes, because it is not possible to quickly slide the entire list of modes. So really the camera interface experience seems very simple to me. The video recording is completely good. It gives us very good recording quality on all lenses. In this case, I recorded at 30 frames per second in 4K. Definitely that the colors are very faithful and very accurate. The main camera also maintains good focus, although there are moments where the white balance could become slightly inaccurate. But honestly, it is very good quality. I also note that when switching to the ultra-wide camera, it maintains the same color representation to give a sense that it is a single camera, unlike other devices that when switching between the main camera and the ultra-wide camera, change their colors too much. The focus, I insist that it can become correct in aggressive movements and subtle movements. So video recording will undoubtedly be one of the strongest points of this device. Just remember that the ultra-wide camera does not have autofocus, which puts it at a disadvantage against cameras that are much more versatile. The main camera does have autofocus, and in fast movements it will also adjust well. Indoors, we will also see a very true-to-life color rendering. While it doesn't look as attractive with saturated colors, I must say that it was very faithful to how this scene looked in reality, where we had quite a lot of darkness. I also really like the noise handling that the main camera does, although in the ultra-wide camera this is not as positive. In the ultra-wide camera, you get to notice the presence of noise a bit more, so recording in low light conditions, it is more advisable to use the main camera. In backlit conditions, we also have an excellent result, as it does not sacrifice the illumination of the rear area in order to illuminate well the face that was in shadows. I just find the colors slightly paler in this kind of conditions, but even recording with the ultra-wide camera, it maintains a good performance recording backlit, which is also very remarkable, so we have a good quality. And at night, we have pretty much the same performance. That is, the main camera will have a very good capture of light and colors, but when you switch to the ultra-wide camera, you lose definition and much more noise appears present. Even in darker areas, you will immediately notice the greater light input that the main camera has, possibly also due to its good aperture. And when you switch to the ultra-wide camera, you immediately notice that it is a much lower level camera. The stabilization with the main camera is excellent, so you can go walking and the movement will be disguised in a very good way. Also, all this considering the quality of the camera. Even when running, I think the movements are very well disguised, but for a better result you could use the action mode. Although in this mode the resolution is lowered, but if it is higher than full HD. So the result is very positive, and consider that in action mode you can use both the main camera and the ultra-wide camera. Although you must stop recording to switch between these lenses unlike the other recording modes. But the result is no doubt very positive for the action mode. And notice that, even recording with 2x without the action mode, the result is extremely attractive with respect to stabilization, disguising movements very well. And if you use the action mode, you will also have a good result, although the scene is cropped a little more. But it is definitely one of the best stabilization devices using zoom. In fact, the time-lapse also has stabilization, although this time-lapse cannot be adjusted in terms of its speed, so it would be much better if it gave us manual controls. Also consider that this time-lapse is in full HD and not full HD. However, its automatic speed adjustment seems to me to work well because I was even able to record landscapes as well, fast-moving ones, and I liked the result very much as well. Although again, I think a very weak point is that this recording is done in full HD. On the other hand, the slow motion can go both at attentively at 120 and 240 frames per second, in both cases in full HD. So the quality is very good, but it is not the best exponent in this sense because there are devices that can record even slower. And finally, remember that this device also has a scene recording mode to keep the foreground in focus and blur the background by applying a bokeh effect. The truth is that the result is extremely positive because it even changes the intensity of the blur depending on the distance from the camera. Definitely the result is extremely accurate and also maintains good colors, good exposure, and good stabilization. The front camera records with an excellent quality very similar to what we see in the rear camera, and that is something that is appreciated because most devices have a front camera with a very different recording quality. However, in this case, in addition to maintaining a very good color representation, it also has autofocus, it also has a good backlight performance, although not as excellent as what we saw in the rear camera, but it seems to me that the performance even so in general is too good. It also maintains good stabilization when you're walking around. So you're definitely going to enjoy recording with this device and its front-facing camera. Although indoors it might suffer a bit more than we would like with respect to noise handling, unlike what we saw with the main camera that gave us a higher quality. In fact, you will also notice colors a little bit paler, so I think you do need a very good lighting to have a good quality recording with the front camera. At night, you will notice a very similar result to what we saw indoors. Definitely when you are in the best lit areas you will have a good result, but you will also notice more noise, especially when there is a greater amount of movement in the scene. And if you go to much darker areas where there is no artificial light, you will definitely notice even more noise presence, although this is an extremely complicated recording condition. But here it is much more noticeable as it does not have a good noise treatment. This front camera offers a slow motion mode in full HD at 120 frames per second in case you require it. It also has fast camera, although again in full HD and with an automatic speed setting, which in this case I feel is too fast. Possibly what I like most about this front camera is the movie recording mode, which is very good at blurring the background to apply a bokeh effect while maintaining the same color accuracy and good stabilization. Even in this case, it is curious that it does come to detect the objects to keep them in focus, unlike portrait photographs. And it also has a mode to refocus to the background when it stops detecting your face. So really the quality is very advanced and is the best of this device. This device comes with iOS 17, and that is possibly one of its strengths, but at the same time a weakness because it is exactly the same operating system that is integrated into other iPhones, even from past generations. Although in this case, just by the simple fact of having the dynamic island, it's likely that it might have a little more appeal to older users. But I think it could also appeal to the iPhone 14 Pro, which could be coming down in price and also integrates the dynamic island and other features. As you know, the dynamic island is going to serve us to have some activities in real time. And I think that's very good news because if the developers know how to use it very well, they could finally have some things running in the background. Because as you know, to give you an example, when you're uploading a story on Instagram, if you exit the app before it finishes uploading the story, it's probably never going to be published. And that's a very weak point of iOS, but notice how it now shows us through the dynamic island the progress of this story so we can finally have some things running in the background, but I insist that developers should update their apps. In the dynamic island, we can also have some live activities, such as the progress of your Uber or the score of your favorite match, although that will obviously depend entirely on the developers. Another outstanding feature of iOS is that you can easily extract text from some photos or videos by simply holding down on that text. So you can copy and extract it for digital use. Depending on your region, iMessage could also be attractive. Although in Mexico it is not a widely used application, but Apple has lately given a lot of emphasis to this messaging application, in which it has added very interesting features, especially for group chats. Although I insist that iMessage is widely used in the United States, but outside that country it is a little less common. The Shortcuts application is another attraction because you can automate several things on your iPhone, and even in the gallery section, we will find a list of predefined accesses since the creation of these automations can be a bit complex, but thanks to the gallery it will be a little easier. In fact, there are several functions that natively does not bring the system, but through these shortcuts and automations you could get to supply in some way, but it is a bit complex to use. Another section where you could automate some things on your device will be in the focus section. We can have several approaches created that would be some modes of use. For example, the work focus, and here you can tell it which notifications you do want to receive from both people and apps, and the rest will be hidden because you are in a specific focus. You can automate it with a time, but it is not an automation as extreme as the one we can find in the Shortcuts app, since here it is simply to avoid notifications or distractions. And a little detail that might go unnoticed by many is the experience with the haptic engine. This is the vibration engine that generates a very nice response on this device, as it is on the X-axis. Although it has no response when the lists are finished, but you could realize at the moment of sliding between these lists that the device emits an haptic response in a very precise way in this type of interactions. Although there are other manufacturers that are increasingly adding more and more haptic responses in the system to give a more natural feel, and in this case Apple seems to be lagging a little behind. Because even though its optical engine is of excellent quality, not all the system is going to respond to it. In conclusion, we could say that it is a system with reduced functions compared to most Android devices, but with an excellent integration with the Apple ecosystem and an excellent update policy. For security, we have the Face ID system, which is facial recognition in 3 dimensions. So it's a much more advanced facial recognition than what we see on Android devices. In the configuration, it allows us to define an additional appearance, so theoretically we could have 2 records of different faces, although it is more focused on recording 2 different appearances of the same face. For example, with beard and without beard and similar alternatives. It also allows us to have Face ID function with face covers, which is very useful. Although from my point of view, it would be more comfortable if in addition to Face ID, they included Touch ID on the power button or inside the screen, but it is something that Apple seems to be unwilling to do. As part of the software, we could also have a more convenient experience if it had a smart unlock so that at home or in trusted locations, the iPhone stays unlocked, but it's not available. Fortunately, we do have a password manager, which is the iCloud keychain with which automatically by scanning our face, we can fill in passwords. Also, everything is synced in the cloud between all our Apple devices so we can share our passwords with multiple devices. Another very useful section focused on security is screen time, where we can determine some time limits for applications. It will also be able to alert us when we are using too close the iPhone and we should move it away from our sight to not damage it so much. We can set some limits and content restrictions. So it's a device that for family use would be very good, but in Android we also see a kids mode with which you can easily lend your cell phone to a little one. All these features that Apple incorporates, I see them more focused for a child to use as a personal phone, this device, but not for you to lend it to them for a brief moment. So also in this sense, there is another point of improvement. Since in Android, many devices have a special kids mode. In addition, it does not integrate application lock nor secure folder, although I insist that some of these options you can create them through shortcuts, but it is much more complex. Through the Find app, you can easily locate your devices and remember that even if the iPhone is turned off, it is still findable, and this is something that no Android device currently can offer you. So we have a very good security system in case we lose the cell phone. In addition, it has an SOS emergency section so you can quickly issue an alert, and it also has crash detection so your trusted contacts could also be notified in case of an accident. So these kinds of implementations also come to perfect the safety experience, which is considerably good but could still be better. The battery is 3,349 milliamps, although that is an unofficial data since Apple does not officially communicate in its specifications list the capacity of this battery. In my tests, it performed really poorly. Unfortunately, I don't have a totally equal test that I do on Android, but considering the numbers that the iPhone 15 Pro and the iPhone 15 Pro Max gave me, this is the device that has lasted the least on its battery, which was expected because it's a very small and very thin device, so its battery really is also small. It's a device that you're constantly going to have to charge. It has a battery saver mode for everyday use, which can help you extend the battery life a little bit more, and I think you will almost always have it on. The bad thing is that it does not have a much more extreme saving mode for an emergency that allows you to protect the battery as much as possible to only have the essential functions available as we do see in other Android devices. Also, consider that the 20-watt charger is sold separately and charges fast only the first few minutes. So in 15 minutes, it got us back 27% of the power. In 30 minutes, it got back 54%, but the full charge it finished in 2 hours and 18 minutes. So it really takes a long time to finish charging the device. So the experience is not advanced in this regard. Also, it does incorporate wireless charging, but it will be a very slow wireless charging, 7.5 watts, unless you use the original MagSafe charger, with which you could have 15 watts, but it does not have reversible wireless charging, as we could find, for example, in the Galaxy S23, so that you put to charge your AirPods or your Apple Watch on the back of the cell phone. That aspect Apple will surely put in the iPhone 17 or iPhone 18. So the battery experience can fall very short compared to what various Android devices currently offer. The advantage is that the iPhone does show us the maximum battery capacity, so if you're buying a used iPhone, it's important to check this maximum capacity to see how healthy the battery is. Also, to help the battery not degrade so quickly over time, you could enable the 80% charge limit if you are a user who needs to always have your device connected to the power, or you could also use the optimized charging in case you are one of those users who leave their cell phone charging all night. With both options, you could prevent the battery from degrading so quickly. Connectivity is undoubtedly very good. It supports 5G networks to have a very good speed, and you can also set very easily and simply which applications can access the internet using your mobile data and which applications can only do so via Wi-Fi. And while we are on the subject of Wi-Fi connectivity, in this case it supports Wi-Fi 6, unlike the Pro models that support Wi-Fi 6E. But it seems to me that from this version we already have a good download speed, although obviously it will always depend on your internet provider. It also integrates Bluetooth 5.3, so you have a good level of connectivity, with good stability too, although remember that you can't send files over Bluetooth as you would with other devices. And likewise, NFC is limited to use only within Apple Pay, so yes, you could bring the iPhone close to banking terminals to make payments, but NFC would not be useful for linking to other devices by bringing your back close. As with most of today's high-end devices, we don't have FM radio here, but we do have wireless display projection, although your monitor must support Apple's AirPlay technology for you to be able to project your screen. So here too, the experience is a little bit more limited. If you want, you can also connect it to your vehicle's display via Apple CarPlay, both wired and wireless. And while I'm mentioning the cable, I should remind you that it's a USB 2.0 port. That is a disadvantage from my point of view, since it is a very expensive piece of equipment that is not going to offer us a very good speed of information transfer through this port. The iPhone has very good sensors and of good quality, only that it does not have proximity sensor because it uses the same mechanism of Face ID, but the rest of sensors will work in a good way. The Apple ecosystem is probably one of the strongest and most attractive points of this device, since Apple has a very good variety of products and they all work harmoniously with each other. We will find AirPods, Apple Watch, iPad, iMac, Apple TV, HomePod, which also have very good technologies to interact with each other. For example, from the Apple Watch you can take photos, you can easily connect an iPad as an external monitor of your Mac, and many other things. So their ecosystem is of many devices of this brand that coexist perfectly with each other. And even lately they have opened up their ecosystem slightly. So as I mentioned a moment ago, you can now find TVs from Sony, LG, Samsung and others that bring support for AirPlay so you can project your screen wirelessly. Remember that they also have technologies like AirDrop or continuity that could help you improve your experience. The Apple ecosystem is definitely one of the most complete you will find today. Also, the brand has too much strength, so you don't feel like you are dependent on some other brands. They have their own cloud storage through iCloud, with which they offer you 5 GB for free. And also for home device control, they have their own app and their own protocol called HomeKit, so it can become very easy to set up your smart home with compatible devices. But where it is most noticeable that it is too big a brand is in the services they offer you. Since they have Apple One, Apple Music, Apple Books, Apple Arcade, Apple Fitness Plus, Apple Podcast, and many others. And these are things that we generally don't find with as much variety in other manufacturers. That's why I insist that Apple is one of the strongest brands today, offering you its own services, its own technologies, and its own ecosystem. And it all coexists perfectly with each other. Let's go to the performance test that you are seeing in fast motion while I tell you that this device has the Apple A16 Bionic processor accompanied by 6 GB of RAM, although this is unofficial data because Apple does not communicate it. In addition, there are versions of 128, 256 or 512 GB of storage, but none with microSD support. In this case, it took 2.8 seconds on average to open each of these applications. Honestly, I didn't find it to be the fastest experience I've seen. Some apps took a little longer than I would have liked. Although definitely that the processor is going to be very good quality, but probably because I had power saving mode enabled, we didn't see maximum performance. Honestly, I forgot to disable power saving mode, but since I reckon that power saving mode you probably have it enabled 90% of the time, I think it was good to have done the test with that mode on. Anyway. Notice that even though it takes a bit of time to open the applications, the performance within each of them is actually extremely good. We are not going to see any moment of hitches or slowness. In fact, since it loaded the application when we slide on the screen with all the content, we do not see that it is getting stuck. The curious thing is that the 60 Hz screen could give us a feeling of little fluidity compared to what we find in other devices. But I insist, the performance will be really very good. Although it must be remembered that this processor is not the most current that Apple offers in its catalog, so it is exactly the same processor that we would find, for example, in the iPhone 14 Pro, which I consider could be one of the main competitors of this device. Also, the base model storage is 128 gigabytes, so it could come up very short. In this case, I have the addition of 256 gigabytes, which I think would be the most appropriate. Since currently in the Android world, many devices from the low end already begin to offer us 256 gigabytes. So I consider it absolutely necessary that Apple raises the figure of its base capacity, especially considering that you cannot expand the storage through some special card or something similar. Finally, for gaming, Apple does not have any manager application to enhance the experience or something similar. Only we are going to find the game's approach, which the only thing it will be able to do will be to avoid interruptions from people or apps to avoid annoying notifications. You can tell it to be enabled automatically when you connect a gamepad or something similar, but the experience feels extremely simple compared to the many options Android manufacturers offer to enhance your gaming experience. In Call of Duty, this device, by default, gives us very high quality graphics at a high frame rate. In fact, the very high quality is also available and the maximum rate is also available. Something that seems to be positive, but because the screen is not over 60 Hz, we are not gonna have such an advanced experience. What we will notice is good graphic compatibility with the different effects. Also, it does have super resolution mode and some other experimental things available. With this configuration, the experience was really good, although let me insist a little more on what I was explaining about the 60 Hz screen, which plays against it in this gaming section, because even though the processor has very good power, you cannot really take advantage of so much due to the limitations of the screen. So it will not show you so fluid movements, and even in this game is curious that at times gives the feeling of down to about 30 frames per second, although unfortunately by the version of the operating system we could not accurately monitor the behavior that has frames per second. But as a conclusion, we can say that it does not give us an ultra fluid experience as we could find in other devices. Also consider that this price is already quite high. So definitely that the experience could fall short in terms of frames per second. In the Legends game, we changed the automatic setting to a manual setting to set the quality in a much more complicated test. So we selected Ultra Quality at 60 frames per second. The experience was really very good. Just as an additional comment, we could say that we noticed a bit of complications when sliding the finger on the screen, possibly because of the finish that has this screen to prevent the fingerprints are marked much. Possibly those who like to play too much may notice a little more difficulty on this screen. But speaking of graphics performance, we really had an excellent experience here. We must remember that this processor does not yet support ray tracing, unlike the A17 Pro, where we will find these technologies, so we still don't have the latest, but it really is a very good processor that in this game didn't get very hot. In the SpongeBob game, it defaults the resolution and quality to a high setting. For the test, we set it to epic resolution, epic quality, and 60 frames per second. Again, nothing to complain about. Really here the experience was extremely good. We have good quality graphics. Only I'm sure you'll notice that in some scenarios you see black lines on the sides, but that's normal in many devices. Actually, when playing the game, the entire screen space is used and we have good graphic quality and good fluidity. Only, as a curious fact, I must tell you that it is not able to save your game on different iPhones or if you had progress on other accounts. It is quite complicated in this game specifically to recover progress, but graphically speaking the performance is extremely good without warming up. And finally, in Henshin Impact by default, this device gives us the high graphics quality at 30 frames per second. For the test, what we did was we set the quality very high to make the test as complicated as possible, and we also turned the detail and motion blur up very high and enabled 60 frames per second. And honestly, the experience here was too good. You have to consider that this same processor can run this game at 120 frames per second on the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. So I think the 60 frames per second setting suits it just fine. Obviously, it's not totally unhindered, but it's going to give us a super smooth experience. I would have loved to have measured the performance of this device more accurately, but unfortunately the software wasn't compatible yet. But there is no doubt that it will be a device that will give you a good performance when playing games. And what I like and what catches my attention is that it handles the heating issue very well, unlike the Pro models that have had more controversy around this issue. For the moment, this has been all regarding this device. I hope you liked this video. If you did, you know you can tell us about it, and we'll see you next time.